Hi, Ruth. Hello. Well, it's been a while since we've gotten to, we've been ships in the night. I guess that's what happens when you're a GitHub star. You just can't make time for the little people anymore.
That's not true.
Yeah. I get it. You don't explain it. I understand. I just remember us as you, carry on.
Sure.
Oh, nice. Oh, Homero, it is a glorious Friday, and it's decent weather outside here. So yes, it is Friday. That nice cup of coffee in your hand. Actually, just as I go to provide entertainment for the first minute before we start, I'll say we're going to be showing off Meshery at a talk next week, and I feel a little awkward because it just so happens that occasionally when you give a talk, sometimes you'll get swag for the talk, or if you go to a conference, you get some swag occasionally. And anyway, I gotten this in the mail. This is the conference, All Day DevOps. Not that that's special or anything, but I feel weird because I'm drinking out of that coffee mug, and then they sent a jacket as well, and I'm wearing the jacket. I feel like I may as well have gotten an ADDO tattoo right here, right there. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, good. Meeting minutes. It's the week after Halloween. There are the meeting minutes in the chat, and we're off. Let me share the meeting minutes and let's get rolling on today's community call. Everyone that's on the call as of now has a link to the meeting minutes. So pop your name into the attendees list if you would. It's always nice to reflect on who's here, who we should send, signed copies of books to at the end of the year. We just go back through the list. We then raffle off $1,000 to 8 different names that we pull out of the bucket. No, no, we don't do any of. No, we do some of that. We do not raffle off $1,000, $8,000 based on who shows, but we actually do send out some books or some other things occasionally. It was Kush who had mentioned recently that. Just as I think a point of reflection for him, he'd been around for a while. Guy's been busy making lots of commits every which way. Sometimes we have to uncommit some of those commits, but no more than we have to uncommit any of my commit. Anyway, he was saying how nice it is to occasionally have, actually, this is weird because I wasn't going to talk about swag, but he was saying how nice it is to have a shirt or have a piece of swag or something that has the logo on it. And we've actually got a lot of things with the logos on it. We've got, there's kind of an interesting thing that, that my wife and kids are able to do because they're so much more creatively talented than me. They'll take and print out a piece of paper with the logo on it. They've got a button maker where they'll cut these out, they'll stamp the buttons, and now that I'm talking about it, I should have a button on hand, but I've got a big fat bag of buttons that look just like that with the logo. So, and those are probably cheap enough to put into the mail too. So I guess my prattling on has led me to committing to sending out buttons to people. This Friday is going well. But along with that, we've sent out some books and other things. I hope that that short report has been helpful to most of you who've gotten it before. It's a short report on service meshes. If you don't have it, just mention it. And before I can do it myself, someone else will probably post a link to where you can download this one for free. It gets distributed around our community a lot. On that subject, actually, Faith, I'm not sure if she's on the call or not, but she just got done helping with the second edition of that book. It's coming out any time now. And we'll make sure that anyone who wants one of these gets one in their hand as well, at least digitally, if not physically. So speaking of, I don't mean to talk about these things a lot. It just sort of, I guess they're top of mind, but I'll say this on the record and say that I intend to follow up with Mihu on this, because some of the work that you're doing lines right up with some things that are going to be inside of the patterns in that book. And there's opportunities to engage there. So I just need to go highlight what that is and how we can shine some more light on your work, slap your name somewhere in there. And so, okay. Well, I like how we're doing the community meeting this time. It's just a bunch of random notes for me. It's also good to welcome a bunch of newcomers into the Slack channel. For better or worse, I think we sort of consider that the center of the community ends up being in Slack. In the Layer5 community, we don't make a lot of use of mailing lists. So we don't have kind of group mailers where we have discussions on what's going on. Not that that's a bad thing. We just hadn't gotten that practice going. So we use Slack pretty heavily. Last week, we heard from Pratik, who's been within the community for a while. He's been helping in terms of community management. He had a quick note. It's actually a note that I'll highlight in case some folks missed it. I'll do it very briefly. And then I'll highlight a different public service announcement. So last week's public service announcement was that you won't believe how much chatter there is in Slack. It's pretty awesome. It's so awesome that we lose the history in our Slack. There's just a rolling retention. There's a certain amount of, for the free Slack, because, and I was just chatting with, and I think he's on the call. And now I can't find my, but I was just chatting with a community member last night who just joined this week. He was having some difficulty getting Jekyll up and compiled, not Jekyll compiled, but using Jekyll and kind of getting his development environment set up, as do we all struggle with dev environments. And he had popped over a question. I was about to fall asleep, and it was just an opportunity to remind him and everyone else that when you can, try to chat publicly in Slack. It helps everybody. Less repeating, more engagement, more opportunity for people to chime in and help and learn. And so, yeah, so if you can, chat publicly in Slack, that's a good thing. Another thing that we would do well to reflect on, and before anyone else highlights it, I'm going to have to, and that is that, one of our mesh mates, Kalichi, does a great job. I think is a professional project manager by trade, and that seeps into a little bit of her focus here, which is, for my part, or I'll speak on my behalf, which is really nice. That part of that focus ends up manifesting by way of following up on issues. So we are lucky, and also by design, we've had, what are we on now? Wow, cool. We're getting up there. We're almost at 2,000 issues, which which is fantastic. But it's also the case that they get stale after a while. So some of you are familiar with the fact that there is a small bot that runs around GitHub that we've configured to run around GitHub. It's the stale bot. It will mark any issues, and I think PRs as well, but any issues that haven't had activity on them for, I forget, I don't know if it's 45 days or 30 days, but it'll mark it with stale, and it'll eventually close it if nothing happens. It will do that unless there's a tag, the issue/will fix tag. So if the tag will fix is on it, then the bot leaves it alone. But inevitably, what happens to many of the issues is that individuals like myself will come by and sign up for an issue with the best of intentions. And then a week later, life has happened. And either their focus has been taken away, or they broke a finger, or whatever has happened in life, and they're not, and the issue remains. And then if we're not diligent, we end up with, well, a lot of things that need to get done, but that aren't being done in part because someone has incidentally and accidentally is like squatting on the issue more or less, or that's the effect. And it's certainly not intentional by anyone. But I wanted to call out a second public service announcement, or like thing to consider, is that it's healthy for us to go back and groom. You hear a lot, I think you hear the word groom in context of a backlog. Generally, backlogs are more about features than they are bugs, but they include both. You know, you're constantly grooming the backlog. That's like the product manager's, the product owner's job. And so it's our job as a community to also groom our issues, either help folks knock out issues that they're working on, which is an amazing thing that most of you do, or help folks realize that that they've gotten distracted, or that they won't be completing, their initial good intention isn't going to land. And so we'll either want to ask them to unassign themselves and help them identify a new issue, or remove them and help them identify a new issue. So in a long-winded way, what I'm asking people to do is, if I know it can be entirely uncomfortable to go over and like suggest that someone get off of an issue. It can be really sensitive. It can be a lot like asking your next door neighbor to turn their music down. Like, I don't know if you've ever done that, but I'll tell you, there's no right way of doing that. You will only end up hurting someone's feelings. If you've ever been successful in doing it and it didn't actually hurt their feelings, then please tell me the secret. Because many of you are, and if you're a member of the Layer5 IO org, that means that your GitHub user has the permission, the rights to triage issues, which includes like assigning yourself, assigning others, updating things. I'm making a call for your assistance in just comments, just help, just your assistance in grooming through the issues. Certainly the Meshery repo has the highest number of issues, but when you look across, there's 44 there's 40-ish something repositories. And so one trick, by the way, just as people go to, as you all go to get into different projects, speaking of, we're going to talk about a new project today, but as you go through the different projects, some of you are probably already hip to this, whereas maybe it took me a while more, is that when you can search through GitHub for a lot of things. You can also do something like an organization-wide search. So this particular search is the URL to this search is one that we include in most of the repositories, and it's a search for anything that has help wanted on it, any issue, but it's across all the repos. So actually, for my part, as I try to spend as much time as I can helping review PRs, I look at PRs across the repos. So it can be a point of confusion for some until you get used to the fact that there's a bunch of repositories here. And so there's activities going on in different ones. And so you want to use a query that you want to look across them all. All right, that was today's public service announcement. And I guess some commitments to swag and other things. I also do commit to, and I've promised this in the past, that if you don't fill in your last name, I will fill in one for you. And it's in just the most loving way that I do this. And so, but I can't guarantee that you're going to like what I write. So it's good. And then with that, we've got something much more interesting. Dev Kalra is interning through Community Bridge, focused on two projects, most notably a project called Mesh Sync, which some of you are playing around with, or interacting with the first version of Mesh Sync, which is currently inside of the stable release of Meshery. Mesh Sync is just a component in Meshery that will actively go over and interrogate Kubernetes for anything that might, for a bunch of information about Kubernetes. How big is the cluster? How many nodes are there? All the resources. Are there service meshes that are running? It just collects that info and brings it back so that we can display it. That initial architecture wasn't done very well. I can say that having been part of that, and we acknowledged it at the time. And so there's a collection of folks of contributors that are working on, and Dev in particular is working on refactoring Mesh Sync to be a lot better. And part of it being better means that it's using some technologies that are new to the project. One of those is GraphQL. And so I gave Dev a lot more lead time than most on providing, than much of the time that I do when I ask someone to come and present. And so it was 22 minutes ago that I asked Dev to present GraphQL today. So I thought it would be nice for all of us to get more familiar with that piece of tech if you're not. But if you are already familiar, that you could come to understand how it is that the Meshery project is looking at using it.
Okay, yeah, so is my voice clear?
Mm-hmm. We'll see.
Okay, is it understandable? If not clear, okay. So let me know if it starts breaking or it's not clear. Okay, let me share my screen.
I'll say this, that like in advance of you getting going, it is staticky. And so I can imagine some people will, I don't know how much of a pain it is to change, but.
Okay, I can do, yeah, let's just then start with this, I don't know. Okay, so this is just an introduction to GraphQL, like why we should use this thing, what exactly is this versus REST, which currently we are using in Meshery server, and you may have, if someone has worked on web development, then usually we start with REST APIs, that is get, post, something like that. So let's just start with this. So first, an introduction. So first thing, actually, I was studying about REST APIs in the past, and the first thing that the one thing that was really interesting to me is that that get, post, put is that is not RESTful architecture. It's just that is RESTful architecture is just a specification. It just defines what the request and what the response will look like. What should there be in that architecture, something like that. So GraphQL is something similar. It's a specification and not some library which you can just use. to develop things. It's a specification which specifies the request and response. Like request will be like this and response will be something like this. So what it provides us, it basically provides us with a declarative way to fetch data. Now I will come to that, like what is the declarative way here. Another thing is it makes our API calls a lot more efficient and flexible. I will cover that too in the next slide. So this is the declarative way. Okay. So this is my browser and I am requesting the data something like this. Like I want user whose ID is this. I want his or her name, the post that he has written, the follower's name, and things like that. And you can see that I am basically it's the declarative way. I am not calling some endpoint. I'm just giving it's some fields that okay, give me this data. And the in the backend GraphQL server will just return that much, like name, post, followers name, something like that. So this is the declarative way. And yeah, let's go GraphQL versus REST, and I will tell you like why is it more efficient and it's generally faster than REST. So yeah, GraphQL is more efficient because we can get all the data that we need. Like not only a single user, we can get multiple users too. We can get all the data that we need in a single request and response cycle, and we don't need to do requests again and again and again to get different data. So that's why it's more efficient. And usually we use a single endpoint to fetch data. GraphQL let us it's basically supports rapid product integration. Why and how it supports, I will come back to this. Another thing is it solves the issues of overfetching and underfetching. So what is overfetching and underfetching? So basically say there in RESTful APIs, there is a get endpoint, and that endpoint can give a name to you if you give it the user ID. So okay, so you call that get API and you get the name, but now you won't post. So there is another endpoint for that. For followers, there is another endpoint. So that is like underfetching. For at every single endpoint, we are getting data less than what we want. So that's something it solves. And overfetching is something similar to this. Like we only need the name, but we have to get all the other things: post, title, followers name, to get just the name. So this is something that GraphQL solves easily. Okay. Okay, and I told you like I will come back to this rapid product integration. So first, before going to that, first I want to define something. So GraphQL has a strongly typed system. Okay, what we have to do, we have basically it provides us with a language using which we can define our APIs. Okay, and so that language is something like a JSON. You just define the types, you just define like fields that will go in there and something like that. If someone has have worked with Protobuf, it's something like that. Okay, so to use GraphQL, first the front-end team and the back-end team has to work on the schema. Schema is nothing, it will defines the API. So that is something they have to work on. Once they have defined the schema, they can simply start working on the front end and on the back end. Like they can work asynchronously. They only have to define the schema. And this is why it supports, this is one of the reasons it supports rapid integration, because we have fixed the schema. Now backend team can develop it at any pace, and front-end team can, on the base of that schema, can just can develop, right? And another thing is front-end teams can just use dummy data to basically fill the field. So there is this concept of resolver in GraphQL. Okay, so using schema, this is the schema. This is something like a schema: user name, followers name, age. So using the schema, we can get all this data, right? But how will that work? How will GraphQL server be implemented? And resolvers come into the same then. They basically, for every single type that we define in this, that we define in schema, we have to define resolvers, and resolvers resolvers nothing. It will just get us the data for that particular resolver. For example, here, so this is a pseudocode, not any programming language. There was a type that I defined in the schema user, and for that there is a resolver function basically that I will define, which will return the user based on sub ID, and that's it. That is what resolver is. Okay, so yeah, I told you this how to use. We have to define a schema. Both teams can work parallelly, and there are things like we don't need to take care of the underlying network network layer, like how things will work, how we will be working with streaming data and all those things. There are libraries that can help us. For example, for front end, we have Relay and Apollo. And I think as we have decided to go with Relay first, so we will work with Relay this time in the front end. And for backend too, there are libraries that will handle all the underlying network related things for us, and that's it. So the thing is, okay, it's like more efficient than REST, but it's also provides us some other things. Like we really don't know the UI needs. For example, today I just want username, that's it. And in future, I want username and something else like user post and something. So in REST, what we have to do, we have to go to the backend, we have to change the endpoint, maybe create a new endpoint, or maybe create the logic behind a certain endpoint. In GraphQL, we don't have to touch the backend. In fact, we can just change that declarative way in which we are getting all the data, that query in the front end itself, and it will just work. We don't have to go to the backend and change anything. So that this is why it supports rapid product integration. It's faster that way. We don't have to touch backend and just change the front end and it will just work. And it's clearly faster than that. Another thing is, so we write resolvers for getting data, but it doesn't matter like what our data source is. Like it can be database, it can be API, or it can be anything. The resolvers will take care of that and it will just get us the data using the GraphQL. And that is pretty much GraphQL is. And where we can use GraphQL, actually Lee covered this thing before this presentation. We are planning to use this in Meshy server, that token image that is running on your local machine, and the Meshy UI and right now. So yeah, that is it. Any questions? I hope my voice was clear and
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, we're breaking up a little bit in between, for me at least, so I'm not quite sure. Maybe you mentioned it. What's the how does GraphQL relate to OpenAPI and Hull?
I don't know about OpenAPI, but general endpoints thing, then REST API or?
The OpenAPI is used to be called Swagger. Maybe you know about Swagger, which was like designing your REST API and describing it and documenting it. And the Hull is what does Hull stand for? It stands for Hypertext Application Language, and it's also sort of providing a way to navigate your whole resource tree, if you like, from one entry point, and with links to other linked resources, so that you actually can discover your resources and your resource structure starting from one endpoint. So the question is,
to be honest, I have not used.
I mean, it sounds like they're sort of like trying to solve different the same problem in different ways. Like, how do you define the contract, and how do you navigate your resources and your resource tree, if you like, from one starting point. So I just wanted to know how they relate to each other, whether you would, what sort of the current trend is to use GraphQL rather than OpenAPI or Swagger definition, and whether the Hull is something that is sort of like used in or has been considered to be used in this project as well.
No, I even you have mentioned this right now, but I haven't even heard of OpenAPI. But yeah, I can means as you're saying things like it is something similar to GraphQL, so I'm getting some idea like what this thing is, but I really don't have any idea about OpenAPI.
No, I think Hull sounds a bit similar to GraphQL from the sort of conceptual that you the response you get when you query, say, for a user, and the user is member for a group, then you would have a sort of standardized a set of links that will point to the group, for instance, and then you can navigate to the group, and then from the group you can navigate to other members of the group, and so on and so forth. So it gives you this possibility to implement a flexible, if you like, client side where the client can discover the whole resources and information about the resources without having to know everything when it starts. So the client doesn't need to know that a user has a property or is member of a group. It gets this information when it queries the user resource or gets a user resource back. But I think GraphQL, I think I've read about GraphQL as well before, and it sounds very attractive. So I just wondered, how these relate to each other, and whether it's sort of like you choose, and whether you sort of choose between GraphQL and Hull, and between GraphQL and OpenAPI or earlier Swagger, and whether this is sort of something you sort of would compare to each other and look at the needs and the solutions and then choose one of those, or a combination, or whether it's a combination, whether you still get a OpenAPI definition out of GraphQL. What did you call it? Schema.
Yeah.
Because often when you look at API gateways, you can import OpenAPI definitions, and then you get all sorts of magic in the API gateway, and automatically expose like the documentation and stuff like that. But maybe someone else knows more about this.
I have some comments. I don't know that collectively I know anymore. The comments are that there have been some projects, and actually at least one, maybe two API gateways that I'm aware of that will take a Swagger definition and help, and basically be a gateway between your ongoing Swagger definition and GraphQL. Some of those gateways, my understanding is that they facilitate running both REST and GraphQL at the same time, which I guess is like inherent to what I just said about the gateway, but which is nice. To part of your other comments, some of the considerations for use of GraphQL here are, so Meshery does use REST today, and the two clients that the community works on, the Meshery CTL and the Meshery UI, they both use Meshery server's REST API. There were kind of two considerations as to why it is that we thought, geez, maybe REST isn't the thing for this use case. And I'll share something that I think will be interesting to let your eyes gloss over at, but it's not necessarily well easily digestible. It is color coded with pink, so that makes it somewhat easier. But that's to say that the mesh map project that some of you have seen, and some of you haven't. If you're not familiar with mesh map as a project, inside the community drive under Meshery, functional and architecture design, there's a mesh map folder. And one of the contributors, Anirudh, who I have to harass later if he's not on, because he should be. Okay, I'm gonna take a note, harass Anirudh. He had done a prototype some time ago, and you can check it out. I'm going to play it here briefly. There's no sound. It's a very short 10-second clip. The project itself speaks to the fact that networking is confusing, and virtualized networking that service meshes facilitate is super confusing, as most of your containers are ephemeral and things change, and how you're configuring your service mesh has a massive impact on what goes on. And so visualizing it for humans is important. So we're undertaking that task. And this is just an early demonstration of how it is that someone might interact with a map like this, where a node maybe represents a service. You might click on it and maybe pull up a context menu. In that context menu, maybe you want to run a load test. So click and hold, maybe go to the load test and invoke the performance test that, if you've been using Meshry, that you're kind of familiar with. That's the performance test under here. And so if you think for a moment about how fluid this type of an interface is, how much data there's kind of, so the two considerations, I think, that were at the forefront of why GraphQL is a good technology to use between Meshry server and Meshry UI, Meshry UI being the thing running this mesh map. One of those is that you're going to want to have a stream of updates coming through for when, if you're going to display in the UI here the fact that maybe there's network traffic that's being received on one service, on one node, and going to the next. Maybe you want to animate that or show that. You're going to want to have a lot of you want to have a stream, a feed of updates. GraphQL incorporates use of WebSockets. WebSockets being a nice way of opening up kind of a bidirectional stream of info from between this client and the Meshry server. And the second reason that GraphQL, we were leaning into GraphQL over REST for this is because this is just a prototype. But when you look at a visual interface like this, I'm going to bring up a picture, because it'll serve us all a lot better. So in my most recent previous role was heading up technology strategy at SolarWinds. And so SolarWinds produces 60-something software products. And I gotta say, leading technology strategy for 60 products at a time, that'll give you ADD if you didn't have it before. But part of doing that was having my teams work on new initiatives, and one of those was this. And it has nothing to do with the fact that we're working on MeshMap. Other than the fact that it's about the same darn thing, it just so happened that people need visualizations. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is to say, as you build out such a visualization and you provide a lot of data, and people go to look at it and they begin to ask all kinds of questions. And by that, I mean, they will quote unquote ask questions like, well, I only want to see the Redis clients. So they'll ask that question of the map, of the visualization. They'll do that by way of maybe searching for a particular term, applying any kinds of filters, switching the layouts. They don't like the concentric thing. They want to lay it out in a different way. And so it's really hard to, give, there are an infinite number of questions, or there's a lot of ways that people are going to want to view the data. And we want to enable that. And you can't, it becomes a little constrained and difficult. It's not that you can't achieve it with REST. It's just probably easier with GraphQL. And so it was those two considerations, facilitating a socket for live updates, and then facilitating a very powerful query. As a matter of fact, you think about GraphQL as its name, you think about the word graph. So here's a little bit of the architecture of, it's actually It's right here. It's very straightforward. There's a GraphQL server in Meshery that will read from the information that Mesh Sync, which I was mentioning earlier, where it would have collected that information from Kubernetes. And it will serve up that info to a client. In this case, the visual topology inside of the Meshery UI. Okay, comments or questions? There's something else that's sort of being snuck into this conversation, and it's this bubble up here, which there's a repository in the Layer5 IO org called Meshery Operator. And it is a young project. This is where I was mentioning earlier that mesh sync that Dev and others are working on. If you want to learn more about the initiative and that project and things, there's a number of docs, in the folder between mesh map, and I thought there was a mesh sync. Lots of info in there. Talk to Dev but yeah.
Yeah, I did quite a lot of work with REST and HAL and designing REST API, and understand the challenges or pains that were described now, and that GraphQL seems to address. So it's exciting.
Yeah. I character. Yeah, I'll bite. I'll say one other thing, and that is there's a project at Cisco that my team was leading. It's a Cisco's cloud management platform, and so it was managing. This is 6, 7, whatever years ago. It was managing OpenStack and vCenter, vCloud Director, AWS, some Cisco gear, but it was managing infrastructure, and the components in the system, similar type setup. There was a client and a server. The server had a REST interface. The REST interface was constrained, and because of the way it was designed in the UI that was a client of the REST server, the user experience was constrained as well, and it made it very kind of clicky. You had to kind of click to get more information, and the queries that you could ask of REST, just like, they weren't very powerful. And moreover, the authorization of that REST API was such that it hadn't really considered for the use cases that we wanted to do in the UI, which is to say that, like, there were certain objects in REST, certain resources in REST, that while the currently authenticated user in the browser didn't actually have access to those REST resources, they did need to see, like, in order to show them what we needed to show them, we needed to actually query and get information about those resources in order to answer, provide the right. But because the query that was being done using that user's credentials, well, then they were just denied access to. And so what we ended up doing was, was like creating an escape hatch to have a REST endpoint that accepted a SQL query, which is like, I wince because it sounds like, and then there was a security hack, and $500 million later, there was, like, it's a bad design, but you could send in a REST SQL query that was, there was a lot of security applied to it on the back end to try to help prevent things. But the point is like, if the project was going to die, if we couldn't give the right user experience. And so in my mind, GraphQL, I use this in mental analogy for me, like GraphQL is almost, what we did in that scenario was bring the power of SQL to REST. And that's kind of a sentiment that I share about GraphQL.
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy to think it like that, because yeah, so many people have used graph as SQL, I think, but not GraphQL. It can be said like it's similar. We can get what we want from the database. Yeah.
All right. Two other items. Michael, I think you have an item. Let's see.
Yes, it was Slack. I couldn't come up with a better question. It's more a question or a concern. You mentioned some of it at the beginning of this meeting. Like we have a retention time of about 3 weeks now in Slack. So Slack doesn't really scale with the community, and which means that some of the discussions we have span over more than 2 or 3 weeks, and so it makes it difficult to sort of like go back to discussions, and maybe we decided on something as part of a Slack discussion, or something was documented as part of a Slack discussion, and then it's not available anymore. Yeah, it was sort of more of a concern. I don't know whether you have discussed this, or that we maybe should be aware of that. We should, as you're writing down now, maybe discuss much more on issues, especially things that sort of like architectural decisions and other decisions that we want to go back to, but also troubleshooting. Find a good way to handle those and document those, and of course also in the Google Docs that we're using. I don't know whether there exists alternatives to Slack. I'm not suggesting that we should sort of like switch just like that, but maybe consider.
Yeah,
because we're scaling to 2,000 members and lots more GitHub notifications. Then maybe we have a retention time of a week, and then we can't almost have no discussions on Slack.
Yeah, they become.
Yeah. And I Google quickly, and Slack doesn't sort of like offer free enterprise plan to open source projects, I think. So you get reduction in price, but it still costs a lot of money. Yeah, it's just something I wondered about, whether we should sort of like make this a bit clearer, that we sort of can't discuss things that should be persisted on Slack.
Ayush, do you want to? Do you have? Does anyone have comments, feedback, suggestions?
Heidi? Yeah, am I audible?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think we can shift to Discord if you all agree. It has infinite number of messages, and we can like make a whole ecosystem out of it. It has channel categories, permissions, roles, and everything.
Actually, Discord is one. Yeah, there are. There's another one that comes to mind. I think it's Gitter. I think there's a few choices out there. That's good feedback, Ayush. What do you know? What the limitation? You know what? I gotta say, like, well, I am placating you with this next question. Do you know what the limitations of Discord are?
None that I think would be of major concerns. Actually, also, like, see, I am using Discord for the past year, and the way I have set up my servers is I have included bots that allow for a rules channel and verification and all that. So all in all, I think it's quite feature rich, and we can use it effectively.
Sure, that's not very good. I believe you. Actually, what I meant to say is, yep, like, yeah, nice. Okay, that's a good suggestion. So no retention history, or no limit to the number of users, or
None that I found.
nice. Yeah, yeah.
There is just one, like we cannot upload more than 8 MB of a file of more than 8 MB size.
In Discord.
Like, yes,
Yeah.
this is one, and I don't think it will matter. We can just give some Google Drive links or something.
Right. So, anyone else have thoughts? Discord. Yeah, from Rasa. Yeah. Oh yeah. So Navendu. Let's talk about this for a moment. So Michu, thanks for this. Oh geez, we have 5 minutes left. We'll talk about. We will talk about this new project next time. Michael, I agree. I guess for my part, like, hey, I agree that use of GitHub issues or using GitHub issues and using GitHub discussions, if people like, which I think some of you are familiar with, some of you maybe haven't seen a newer aspect of GitHub, the discussions. That those two suggestions are aligned with what we started talking about at the start of the call, which was, hey, to the extent that we can, not everything is everyone comfortable having a public discussion on, but when and where you can, try to do it publicly. And if you're using GitHub issues or discussions, or if you're using Google Docs, which all of you are have the permission to create and to modify, have edit permission over any of these, then the thoughts and the conversation, the considerations are captured in a persistent way. And sometimes maybe even in a more articulate way, because it's easy to be a little bit lazier in chat. It's also hard to, GitHub issues occasionally make things hard to piece together when there's like 80 comments and you're trying to figure out what the state of the thing is. But there's a natural point in time where people acknowledge that and they start to write it down in a Google Doc. Those two things I think come to mind as the more prominent places for disseminating tribal knowledge and for having discussions as public as possible. It's not when I refer to public, it's not about things being hidden. It's about and I don't even consider that that's why there's a ton of discussion that happens privately. That's not the reason. It's about what happens is you want to just what happens a lot of times you just want to check with somebody like, hey, I was just thinking about this. Just wanted to like quickly, am I in the right ballpark? And what happens is that instead of it being a quick yes or no, and then the rest of the discussion going in public, it is human nature to just continue the conversation. That ends up being a whole. Anyway, you'll save yourself a lot of time and repeating of yourself if you do it publicly. The reason that Slack is, to be frank, like the reason that Slack is and as a matter of fact, like it's intentional that we're not using mailing lists for a lot of communication. That would actually be another way of having things persistent, but yet still suffer from having to like coalesce, bring everything together to understand what happened. It's a little bit easier in email. The reason that Slack is at part of the core of how we exchange as a community is because I'll say it like this, like Golang, there are other languages that are better for doing things than Golang, although it is the lingua franca of cloud native. Slack is the collaboration tool of cloud native. Every single other of the 9 service meshes, and they're open source communities that create those service meshes. They use Slack as their thing. And so do the other 50 to 100 other project communities around it. And so it's kind of like Facebook. You try to get off, but everybody's still on there. Or at least I'm told. I don't, if you message me on Facebook and I don't respond, I don't get on Facebook. So, but that's kind of the issue with Slack, I'm sorry, that's the sticking point with Slack. The other sticking point that on Slack is that there's some automation that's being done. There's a Slack bot that's being built to help with onboarding newcomers and help with engaging people. And it's not that we can't shift that investment to something else. The most significant thing is that, like, it's the tool that won out in the space that we're focused in. And thank God that it wasn't IRC, because I couldn't handle another project like that. But so I don't, I don't mean to be dismissive. So I hopefully very encouraging what Michael's saying, which is exactly what needs to be done. I'll admit, for my part, I don't consider that it's out of laziness, but it's out of not out of being busy and not forcing myself to take my conversation to a persistent place, to just even go back into what I just chatted and copy and paste that into other thoughts. Like, what else can we be doing? To Michael's point, I've just this last week, I've even struggled a few times where, just this morning, I was working on Husseina, your issue on Meshry CTL. I like it. You do a Meshry CTL system start, my Docker starts right up. It's pretty cool. And I had some more comments and I had some thoughts to share with you. And
Sure, yeah.
I'm bringing this up as an example of, I was going to bring you those thoughts in Slack. And here's what, even though I was sitting in GitHub looking at the thing and I'd already made a number of comments, here's why. I'd already given you what I thought was I had already given you feedback on GitHub, and my thinking was, maybe I shouldn't give you more feedback on GitHub because it might feel to you like, if I were in your shoes, I might have rolled my eyes like, oh, like, isn't this guy going to let it go? Like, I feel like we're going back and forth now. Like, whereas it was fun to contribute this new feature, now now it's like becoming a hassle. And that's actually why I didn't switch into Slack on you. And I actually haven't given you this second bit of feedback yet. But I'm just thinking aloud with everyone, with Michu here, like, because like, you ever have an email exchange and it goes back and forth about 2-3 times, and then all of a sudden it starts to feel like we're arguing, we're not communicating, like, and yeah, just thinking aloud. I'm trying to explain why it is that sometimes I might drag it into a different forum. I didn't in this case. I think that everyone should be trying to communicate as much publicly as possible. For my part, it's a real need. I was going to talk about potentially spinning up a new project and ask for interested parties, and I want everyone to look at it and see if they are interested or not, and so I want to over communicate that, like, you want to. It's a good, so I for my part, like, I'm gonna pledge to remind others and myself to follow up the diligence of putting it into a GitHub issue or putting it into a doc, and it's really needed for my part, because you can see it on my face, sometimes I get frustrated when I have to say the same words, have the same conversation 5 times. And And whose fault is it? Mine, because I didn't go write it down. So. Good. Now that we got a lecture at the start of the call and one at the end, it's a really happy Friday. Thank you, Ayush. Thanks for coming, Rodolfo as well. Michael, a great call out. Dev, I appreciate you jumping in to share your knowledge. For those that want to hear about Get Nighthawk, well, ping me in the Slack. I'll probably send out a different meeting invite if folks want to hang around and discuss it. It's not an urgent thing. Don't spend more time than you need to today, but I'll send out a Google Doc, a link to a Google Doc. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you, Muku.
Sounds good. See you.
Thank you. See you.
Hey guys. Yeah.
Have a nice weekend.